Hey, Resurrection Church. This is Pastor Daniel, and I'm here today with Pastor Mark, and we are continuing our series of fireside chats where we take a look at the core values of Resurrection Church. Pastor Mark, say hi.
Hi, hi.
Hey, I have a question for you before we get started. Do you remember the first time we met?
Yes, I remember the first time we met.
I'm trying to remember myself. It had to be at Hinge Point.
It was at Hinge Point, and we had communion that day. And I was running around that morning before people got there, trying to get everything lined up. And I'm running through the kids' building, and I look out and I see a new family pulling out of a minivan, and you were there early.
Right.
And I don't know if you know the people in Bakersfield, but people in Bakersfield are not early.
Right.
And I was like, of course they're guests and they're here right now while I'm trying to. That's how I remember you. I was like, of course this is happening. And so that's how I walked out, and I'll try to give you the really good rundown of like, hey, here's our kids building and here's what's going on. I'd love to be able to help you right now, but I have 12 things to do. So yeah, that's the first time I actually said hello to you. And then I think we went to lunch not too long after that with my family and your family, and that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I didn't think I didn't realize how bad Bakersfield is about being on time until I started going to Hinge Point.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was just young people in Bakersfield, and that's probably the case still. It's probably the younger people in Bakersfield. But everyone that went to Hinge Point was always late. So, yeah, you were there early. I was like, oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember getting there and really feeling like no one was there and only meeting a couple of people and going, man, where's everyone at? But just it was such a different environment for my family and I.
Oh yeah.
So we've been talking about in the elder room now for quite a while, really since last fall, this idea of new core values, and it started really with a statement that talked about this thing called gospel culture. I'm going to read it to you. And then it kind of evolved from there at an elder retreat. But it started with this statement that we put together that says our goal as a church, our goal is to worship God and work faithfully at the things Jesus left for us to do, becoming more like him in the process. As a church, we believe that doing this together will produce the following things that we call gospel culture. And we have gospel culture in quotes, because that has been just a dominant ideology that we've begun to talk about and work on, and even it's expanded, I think, over the course of the last year or two. Why for us as elders, why for you as an elder is this opening statement, this idea of not just worshiping the Lord, not just growing in the Lord, but a church that reflects gospel culture. Why is that so critical for a church?
You know that phrase, you have your rose-colored glasses on?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's like when you have rose-colored glasses on, it's a filter that you see everything's just golden, just perfect or whatever. I think when we talk about gospel culture, it is telling us the lens that we are looking at the world through. Mm. And so for me, the importance for it is to remind myself the lens that I'm required as a believer in Christ to see as I'm looking out into the world. It's not through my eyes, but it's through God's eyes.
Right. And even more so, I think what you're saying is that it is the lens by which we want to evaluate our church.
Everything. Yeah.
Right. And which is interesting because, if I think about some very good things, so let's say the desire for something to be excellent, like of excellent quality.
Yeah.
The desire for excellence is not a bad thing in and of itself. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's an honorable thing. But if the lens you looked at everything in your church was the first lens, the most important lens was, is it excellent?
Mm-hmm.
I think you'd get different results than if the lens was, does it reflect and show the gospel?
Yeah.
I don't think those are the
with
same.
Excellence. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, I was talking to someone else this morning about this, about, you can do the same thing with different intentions, and the outcome is different.
Right.
And so it's about the intention of what we're looking for. We want to draw people to the gospel. We want to live our lives through that lens of the gospel. We want, when people come to our church, to see the gospel first.
Well, and we're saying some very interesting things sort of all at the same time. And I think it's easy to miss because the statement is short on purpose. We don't want it to be really long, but the statement is short. But what we are saying is that, hey, if we were doing this, if we had a church that was growing in gospel culture, people would be attracted to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's so of all the things you could be attracted to, and there are lots of things that people are attracted to churches for, good preaching or good programs,
Yeah.
good music, or lots of things. And then most of those aren't even bad things.
Right.
We're saying we want to grow in gospel culture, and that the gospel culture will attract.
Yeah, we want to be known for that. Because, like you say, there's many things that churches can grow from, and that's oftentimes what they're known for. The music, the really great coffee they serve in the coffee shop. I mean, I don't know what it is, but it's not that you can't have those things, but we want to be known for that gospel culture.
Now, what does gospel culture really mean? Does it mean we talk about the gospel a lot? Is that what it means? Does it? I mean, what does it mean to define out gospel culture?
It's more about reflection. To me, it's more about reflection on the good news. What is the good news? And it's what Jesus Christ did when he came to the earth for our sins. And beyond that, it's not just talking about it, but how does that change your life? How did that change your life forever?
Right.
And it's looking at that model, and then it's telling us, okay, we see through that lens. Humility flows through the gospel, gentleness flows through the gospel, because that's what Jesus did when he came.
I like your word you just used, change, because I do think we all in the elder room share this same conviction that the gospel is this tremendous change agent in the Bible. So every time you see the gospel impacting a culture, a church, a person, there's always this change, this radical change in which they become more Christ-like. And you were talking about some attributes that describe those things. But I think, putting on this lens to evaluate, are we really reflecting gospel culture, is in some sense saying, boy, if we're not seeing what we know to be part of or produced from gospel culture, so the humility is a good example, gentleness and these various things that our values actually are a lot like that. If we're not seeing those things, we then would question, are we missing part of the gospel? Are we overlooking part of the gospel? Are we not living out part of the gospel? If it's missing, it's kind of like, well, it's not. You go back to the same root, really, which is the gospel somewhere is incomplete in how it's being practiced.
Right.
Which is, it's good for us to have a language where we can go say, hey, we need to work on this or look at this. But it's also kind of scary that if you don't see something, the gospel's not being lived out completely. As a pastor, that's very scary.
Yeah, it's totally scary.
How do you think the average person walking in the door, whether non-Christian, Christian, and maybe this is very different, recognizes that our church has prioritized this idea of gospel culture? How do they see that? What does it look like to them?
It's somewhat of a tricky question, because it's not, you can paint "we live the gospel culture" on every wall that we have, and that doesn't actually tell the story, right?
It's true.
It is the reflection that is coming off of the people, the church, meaning the people, the body of believers. It is that reflection coming off of us that really shows, like, we all struggle with being consistent. We all struggle with being real all the time,
Yeah.
And if we're not living real, people can see that. Like, I'm sure I'm not saying the right words, but
I think we have a nose for artificial and fake.
Yeah. And lots of times we can pretend to do things. And if we pretend, people can see that real easily. And so part of the change, like it really has to change. Like
Mm.
you have to change. Then the gospel changes us.
There's a tough tension there where, like, to really practice the gospel, you got to bring people really close.
Yeah.
Well, the closer you bring them,
The easier, yeah, to see that inner self, to see
right?
the inner yuckiness of. But that's the cool part about the gospel, though, is the gospel. Like Jesus came because we are a wreck.
Mm.
We are all a wreck, and the gospel comes in and steps in and moves and changes us, and that, like, the messiness of our lives points to the gospel and saying, look what God's doing through my life.
Mm.
I'm a total wreck, and in spite of me, God is still using us. God is still moving on our behalf. I mean, that's the power.
Mm. So, one of the things we continue to ask in the elder room, on this podcast, in different meetings with the elders and staff and such is this: tell me how you live this out personally. What does it look like for Mark Heimberger to try to grow in his reflection of the gospel in his personal life?
For me, it has to start with the look at Jesus. Everything starts with him and what he did. And I have to internalize that myself, and so, he died for the world, or he died, but I have to internalize it as he did this for me because I am a total wreck, because I couldn't do it myself. He did it for me. And that helps me set the tone of humility in my life, so that I have, and it allows me to appreciate the grace that I've been given, which then allows me to reflect that on the world around me.
Mm.
And I am not that guy. Like, I would like to point fingers just as much as anybody else likes to point fingers, but I can't, because of the humility that I have of, like, I am such a wreck.
Mm.
I don't deserve what I've been giving. I am unworthy, but because of the gospel, right? And I want people around me to feel that too. And so, like, those are the driving factors in my life that keep me moving forward.
I have this thing that occurs sometimes as I'm message prepping. Sometimes it happens in my quiet time when I'm just reflecting. And there'll be these times where I think I haven't been embarrassed lately.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a weird way to say it, but what I haven't had to admit something, admit something maybe that was embarrassing, deal with that maybe with someone I don't want to tell, whether that's publicly or just with a new group of people or just, anything really. But the point being that, like, I feel like that resistance I don't want things to be all about me. I don't want to constantly have to be embarrassed for things to work. But I recognize that normally when I get close to having to let God really deal with some sin in my life or some areas in my life where I'm resistant, there's not only just this force of will, but there's also this, man, I don't want to let other people see that either. And so sometimes I'm almost like, okay, what do I need to let people see? Because, like, I know that lets God have a little more space to do work in my heart.
Yeah, in your heart and in others also. I think, if we can internalize that, and he is doing the work in our hearts, right? But oftentimes seeing God do the work in your heart helps God do the work in my heart.
Right.
Seeing God move and make changes, things that I would have thought were impossible in other people. And you're like, man, look at that change. Like, if pride was a thing for you, and you're like coming to people and just telling them everything, like, hey, and you're like, where did that come from?
Right.
Where did that come from? And I mean, where else can you get that than the body of the church,
Yeah. And that brings to mind, I had someone kind of pull me aside the other day and just, they were kind of thanking me and just talking a little bit about the journey over the past year or two. And that was kind of one of the things they were telling me. It was, they were trying to communicate something about the impact that the change in me had on them.
Yeah.
Right. And I had to think about what they were trying to say for a minute there. And I think I got to what you're saying. I think what they were trying to say is, hey, I got to watch God do work. in you, and that actually sparked something in
Yeah.
me. And that's cool. But that's how the gospel
Right.
works.
I mean, that's encouragement, right? Like we
Right.
talk about things that we should get out of the corporate gathering, right?
Right.
When you show up to the corporate gathering, encouragement is one of those things, and it goes both ways,
Sure.
right? Like God is going to encourage you through maybe making some changes in your life, and He's encouraging the people that are watching that, going, "Wow, look at what God did in their life," and then
Right.
you can internalize and go, "He did some stuff in my life too."
Well, what a testament to the corporate gathering. While you can clearly be encouraged in small groups, how awesome in a corporate gathering where someone maybe you're not as close with gets to come and encourage you.
Yeah.
And you'd never know.
Yeah.
Without the body of Christ
And there are
doing this.
people that need to be encouraged, that God will put it on your heart at that point too. Is like,
Yeah.
I that's one of my points is like, you don't know the opportunities that you're missing, because if you're not open to doing that, or you're not at the corporate gathering, it's like,
And
man,
engaged,
yeah,
right?
you have
Yeah.
to be engaged in what God's doing around you.
Right. No, I agree. Pastor Mark, thank you for spending a few minutes just kind of chewing on this and talking a little bit about gospel culture with us at church. We hope this was edifying and encouraging to you as well. And until the next time, may the Lord bless and keep you.